Alright, welcome to another video of just recaps about how to do the types of problems that we're on. In this chapter 3, we're dealing with slope and rate of change and graphs and tables and equations and points and a bunch of stuff that's just kind of all over the place. So this video is meant to help you figure out how to find slope from a graph. So here we go. Oh, also before we kind of dive further, notice my nice little fingered graph right there. Always keep your X on the bottom, Y to the sky, and just kind of a reminder about how to do those graphs. First off, biggest thing we took notes on today in class was what slope means. Slope means rise over run, or it means the change in y over the change in x. These are the exact same thing, and I'll show you what that means based off this piece of information as we move forward here. If we're using rise and run or change in y and change in x, we got to think about our axes. So here I have my y-axis, my x-axis, and if we're looking at rise, first off, before we even start with graph or slope, we look to find two easily readable points on our graph. And so I'm going to look at, just for the sake of this graph, I'm going to look at this point here and this point here. I can pick any two easy readable points on my graph, doesn't matter. But once you pick two, finding the slope becomes pretty straightforward. First off, we're going to rise. Rise means vertical change, and that also aligns with our change in y. So I'm starting with this first point right here, and I'm saying, okay, in order to get from this point to this second point, how do I need to rise? How much do I need to go up? What is my change in y? And so right now I'm just looking for the step tool, and I'm just saying, okay, I'm going to go up from 1 until 3. So my new point was at 3, my old point was at 1, my change then is 2. I went up 2 units in order to get to 3. And then I go to my run, and my run is the same thing as my change in x. So now looking where I start, here's my x value down below, and I'm moving to this point. So when I run, I'm going from my first point to my second, and I see that I go from 2 and end at 6, meaning that I have a change of 4. Now when I write my slope as a ratio, rise over run, or change in y over change in x. That means my slope is 2 over 4. 2 was my change in y because I went up 2. 4 was my change in x because I went over 4. And so I just wrote them as a ratio and reduced down to 1/2. This this graph has a slope of 1/2, meaning that every time we go up 1y, we go over 2x. 1y, 2x, 1y, 2x. And we can see that it holds true throughout the entire graph. Sometimes your graphs won't have easily readable points, so make sure that you put those easily readable points on there. If you see one right at the origin, that's always a really nice, easy readable point, and I'm looking through my entire graph and I'm not seeing a really easy readable point. Well, I do see one there, and that's where it crosses at a really nice part of the grid, where I can see an intersection there and there. Everything else along this graph didn't have those nice intersecting points, so that's why we use that those two dots there. And again, I'm looking at rise over run, or change in y over change in x. And how that looks again is I start from my first point, just giving myself directions to get to the second. So I'm now rising or going up, or vertical change. So again, it looks like I'm starting at 0 and ending at 50. That means my rise has a value of 50 because I went from 0 to 50. My run, or my change in x, then says how do I get from this first point here to this second point here by moving across the x-axis. So after I rose by 50, I run by 2. And so I went from 0 and I ended at 2. And so then my change in value there was 2. So now my slope is 50 over 2, or reduced to 25 over 1. So if your graph doesn't have points, find some easily readable points. Put those and give yourself some instructions. How do I move from one point to the next using rise and then using run? One final example. If you see a graph with a negative slope like we have here, that is still no problem. We can still find slope. And you might be asking yourself, okay, Mr. Nye, but you're rising and running. Rise means move up. When I find my 2 points here, I can't move up to get from one point to the next. You're totally right. Please move from your first point on the left to the second point on the right, and you're still giving yourself directions, except now your directions are going to ask you to move down when you rise. So when you're moving rise, remember that's change in y over change in x. Your rise is that change in y. What you're seeing here is that we have a starting value of, let's say, -2, and we have an ending value of -5. And if we go from there, we're seeing that we start our value at -2 and go down to -5. That means our change is -3. And then when we get to this point here on our graph, we just run over to that second point on the actual graph. And so now when I run, I'm going over 1, 2, 3, 4. So then my run becomes 4 because I moved 4 spaces from where I was. My slope for this graph is -3/4. That means every time that I go down 3, I need to move to the right by 4. So my slope for that one is -3/4. Use this to help you finding slopes from graphs. Think rise, think run, think change in y, change in x. We'll move forward from there.